So ready to go? What's it?
How do you pronounce your last name?
Malewitz?
Malewitz.
Malewitz, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Good afternoon. Let's get started. Our speaker next week will be Duncan Colloway, who is an assistant professor at University of California, Berkeley. And Duncan will talk to us about leveraging large data sets for studying demand-side control and management in low-carbon power systems. It's a great pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Jim Malewitz, who covers energy for the Texas Tribune. Jim, before joining the Tribune, he worked for 2 years with State Line, which is a nonprofit news agency based out of DC. He has written for many venues, including the Chicago Tribune, as well as the Washington Post. You played basketball for your university or baseball?
Baseball.
Baseball.
Mm-hmm.
For the Grinnell College, where he also got his undergraduate degree. He holds a master's degree from the University of Iowa, where he helped start a nonprofit called the Iowa Center for Public Affairs Journalism. Please join me in welcoming Jim.
Thanks, Varun, and thanks for welcoming me here and to Texas in general. I've only been here about 2 months or so I'm still getting my feet wet on the Texas energy beat. But and so I'm still a relatively new reporter in general. My State Line was my first big person job, so I'm still getting my feet wet on the energy beat. But I think I do have some perspective from working at State Line, where I tried to track trends across the 50 states and state policy. Some perspective on kind of how a journalist thinks, if that's useful to you folks who might be talking to journalists sometime, and so hopefully you'll find it useful. And I appreciate you coming out on Halloween, no less. I forgot my frackle lantern, but sorry, that's my editor's joke. Actually, I won't take credit for that since it kind of bombed. But yeah, and so bear with me. I'm used to normally talking and listening to experts, so now it's kind of a challenge for me to actually be the one talking and sort of sharing any insight I have. Usually I just kind of let other folks talk. So I'll talk a little bit about kind of my mindset when I'm thinking about a story, kind of and how important it is to kind of tell this energy story, especially now. And I just wanted to highlight this. I don't know if you saw it just recently. The Wall Street Journal did an amazing data project. I didn't bring it up on the computer because I'm not signed into an account. Just this last weekend, and I thought this kind of contextualized some of the very direct impacts that people are feeling right now from energy. I mean, obviously, covering energy is a very important topic for a variety of reasons, just because you're talking about electricity rates, you're talking about are the lights going to turn on. Texas has this big issue going on right now, which we'll sort of touch upon a little bit later in my talk, this issue of whether we're going to switch our electricity markets from the energy only to the capacity. So you have grid issues, you have consumer affairs issues, costs. Obviously, energy, is necessary for an economy to function, when you're talking about energy and looking at what happened with the recession, it's very possible if it weren't for the shale boom, we might not be sort of wiggling our way out of recession too. So it's a very important topic, and that's why I think it's important for us as journalists to try to get it right. There's a lot of great journalism out there, which I thought this was a great piece, just sort of an excerpt that I put up here from the Post piece that shows, in the past few years, how many people might actually see, an oil well nearby. At least 15 million Americans live within a mile of a well that's been drilled since 2000, and that's more than the population of my home state of Michigan, which I kind of found fascinating. If you go to their website, you can put in your zip code too and see where oil wells are and everything like that. And so I kind of highlighted too, Johnson County, Texas is one of those big areas where it's kind of hard not to see a well pad. So that's one very direct, when you're talking about the impact of the energy industry energy production on people. That's sort of one very direct thing that you can see happening. But yeah, so we're talking about energy. We're talking about, it's very important to me. I'm biased. I think it's, the most important beat there is when it comes to news coverage. But I'm biased. But it encompasses everything: economics. It encompasses transportation. You're talking about the boom in truck traffic, since the fracking boom. Obviously, environmental issues, which we try to cover as best we can. But you have this disconnect, and I don't know if any of you, someone may have been even involved in taking this UT poll that came out a couple of weeks ago. But it was really interesting findings, and it was really interesting for me as an energy reporter to kind of know how people think about energy. I can write a story and kind of hope that people will read it, but it's good to kind of know where folks are coming from when they read it, if they read it, and we kind of see it's interesting. 82% of those at the UT surveyed want the feds to focus on natural gas production, for instance. But then you have a much lower percentage of people who support the use of fracking. Sorry, I don't have the word fracking in there. And so there's sort of an interesting disconnect too. People clearly might not be putting the pieces together of sort of how energy is made, kind of how it goes through the process. There's just 14% of people that were surveyed have read, seen, or heard about energy issues daily. It's down from 21% a year ago. And Politico had a story that touched upon the UT study, and there was also another pretty similar, influential Pew Center study, kind of about public affairs or the public's opinion about energy. And I kind of thought this quote from Margot Anderson, who's at the Bipartisan Policy Center Energy Project, kind of summed up some of the findings of these studies. And what's really interesting as a journalist, it's a no-brainer. The more people understand where energy comes from, where it goes, and how energy markets work, the better they can develop informed views on energy-related policies and controversies like the Keystone XL, hydraulic fracturing, or climate change. And so it's my job as a journalist to put everything in context, and it's a really hard job because there's so many issues to report on, and you can't you have to kind of balance. You have to weigh. You can't write a book every time you write a story about one issue, but you have to figure out how much context to provide in each story. So one way as a journalist, so I can help explain issues, is to write. This is just a straight up explainer I did. I don't know if you want to talk about the very wonky issue of what is a capacity market and what is an energy only market. But in Texas, we're having this very big debate. It's probably one of the bigger energy issues in the state right now about whether we're going to invest in, we're going to pay power generators for maintaining capacity that may only be used on the hottest days, or whether we're going to keep our current energy only market. And there's been concerns about these, the sustainability, I guess, of our energy supply, and whether investors, whether generators will be investing in new supply because of the way that the market is. So so one way I can report on this, and I can kind of report on the minutiae as things happen on the issues. There was an influential Public Utilities Commission vote recently where it looks like the commission might end up, it seems to be indicating they're going to move towards shifting the market, although it's going to take some time. So I ended up, I was reporting on the minutia earlier, but then I realized I don't know if people actually understand what's happening, even though I'm kind of quickly defining it in some of my stories. So I decided to write this explainer that's on the website that went up earlier this week. So that's one way to do it. And the same thing, we did this earlier too. We went to the Electric Reliability Council of Texas, who operates the Texas grid, got kind of a behind-the-scenes look. And this is a pretty, it's a pretty bare bones explainer. And I'll play it for you just to show kind of how what we can kind of do in the media. This is something you can do a little bit easier online than in print. But we just made this video explainer about very basically how, how ERCOT helps run the
Trying
grid.
to figure out how much power Texas will need tomorrow, next week, next month, and next year is not easy. The Electric Reliability Council of Texas, better known as ERCOT, manages the flow of electricity across the state's power grid. But exactly how do you ensure the lights turn on for 23 million Texas customers?
ERCOT's role is to make sure that the power consumption and the power generation is balanced on the grid. And we try to do that in such a way that we're using the most efficient generation to meet that load level. If it's a hot summer day, we may have all of the generation in ERCOT pretty much turned on and dispatching. On a cool spring morning, there may be only the absolute lowest cost generation that's online, and cost is based on what the individual generators bid into the market. Generally, they're basing that on their variable cost, and so that may be wind generation, which generally has no fuel cost, and so they're at kind of however much the wind is blowing, that's how much the wind generators are going to produce. The nuclear plants have a very low fuel cost, and then the gas and coal plants that have to burn fuel are going to be based on whatever their fuel prices are.
Not only does ERCOT have to manage 40,500 miles of transmission lines and more than 550 generation units, it also has to predict the future needs of its users.
We have two basic kinds of forecasting. We have a long-term forecast and a short-term forecast. Long-term forecast is driven mainly based on weather variables, but it's also driven by economic growth, because from now until next year and to 10 years from now, a lot of the growth is going to be driven by economic factors. The growth in the economy, more population, those kind of things. In the near-term forecast, which we do for every hour of the next 7 days, that's driven more by really weather more than anything else, as well as things like the day of the week, because you're going to have a different consumption pattern on a Monday and a Friday, and certainly on the weekends.
One quirk about the Texas grid, it operates almost entirely independently from those in other states. When it comes to upgrading and expansion, that unique status has some advantages.
The main thing that makes Texas unique is that we're not connected except through some limited DC ties to the rest of the United States. We have the eastern interconnection, which is basically the eastern half of the United States east of the Rockies, and the western interconnection, which is everything west of the Rockies. ERCOT is kind of an electrical island.
With this single state jurisdiction, Texas can make most of its decisions without input from other states or the federal government. That's particularly helpful when it comes to building more power lines, something Texas has spent billions of dollars doing in recent years, with much of that geared towards adding wind energy. Projects elsewhere, particularly those that stretch across state lines, have been slowed by a patchwork of regulations and conflicting interests.
I think the common misconception is that it's easy to make it where anytime you turn on the light switch, the lights come on without fail. And in fact, it's a very complicated process. There are a large number of companies and organizations that are all geared toward making sure that that happens. And the process of communicating information and providing bids and selecting bids and the computer systems involved in all of that is really it's been said that it's the world's biggest machine.
Managing the grid is all about long and short-term predictions about the state's growth, its weather, market conditions, and precisely when you might turn on your air conditioner. It's a lot more complicated than simply flipping a switch. Reporting in Taylor, Texas, this is Justin Dane for the Texas Tribune.
So, and I showed you that because I'm sure most of you folks are energy policy wonks, so a lot of you kind of know how that works, and obviously that 4-minute or so video wasn't able to, show the whole breadth of how Texas's wholesale energy market works. But I kind of hope that any of our readers who sees that, I kind of have that in the back of their mind when they're reading my ongoing coverage of different issues within that, as Texas keeps talking about whether it's going to switch its market, or just if I write a story about the federal wind production tax credit and sort of the political debate over that, kind of realizing that wind is one of many different energy sources that are kind of coursing through the grid. So just so they can kind of picture how it all works, because a lot of times I think and as we saw in the UT poll, you know, a lot of times folks don't kind of think about everything at once. You know, you read a story about wind, you're thinking only about is wind energy production good or bad? Should we be, you know, subsidizing it or shouldn't we? And you read stories about fracking and you say, is fracking good or bad? But my goal as a journalist is to kind of look at different aspects of these, you know, kind of tell you know, the energy story in bits and pieces, and hope that folks will be kind of following along to be able to put it all together. So we were kind of hoping that would sort of, you know, for any of our hardcore readers, that would be something that's kind of in the back of their mind as they're reading other coverage and kind of understand that. So, and I'll go back to, and oops. And so I wanted to, and here's another of our stories. I did not write this. My colleague, Nina Satija, who kind of focuses more on environmental issues than energy, but we all often kind of conflict, or we kind of run into each other on our beats because energy and environmental issues are so intertwined. Folks might have been following. There was this big, I guess it was, last month, the big study about how much methane is produced from hydraulic fracturing. There was the criticism of the data before that it was kind of old, and we didn't have a lot of good data on, you know, this pretty important environmental impact of hydraulic fracturing, the methane produced, which is such a potent greenhouse gas, you know, more potent than you know, CO2. This big study was coming out, and a lot of folks who were following this issue were waiting for it for months. And so Nina, you know, reports on it when it comes out. The interesting thing about the study was it was kind of hard to find a really good angle on it, and that's what we do as journalists, is we try to find an angle. We're like, what can we focus on? What's the headline going to be that we're going to write about here? You know, is there more or less methane being produced from hydraulic fracturing than we thought? Again, I don't know if any of the researchers who are in this room, maybe that even worked on it. But the headline was kind of hard to find because it turns out that there were more emissions in some aspects of the process, in well completions, for instance, than the EPA had estimated. So there are fewer emissions in well completions than the EPA had estimated, but also equipment sort of during the process, if I'm correct in recalling the study, was kind of leaking more methane throughout. So it was kind of these nuanced findings. Like, basically, the big goal was just to find the best data to kind of refer to in the future, the big goal of the researchers. But it was kind of interesting how the results of the study cycled through the news. I think Nina did a really good job of, even if it's kind of confusing, you don't see a great takeaway. Usually you kind of hope that the headline is not just, hey, a study came out. It's usually, hey, here's what the study said. But because it was nuanced, she left it at that, even though our editors were saying, what's the takeaway? Like what's it going to be? But, you know, she kind of let them know, we can't, you know, we can't put you know, paint this with a really broad brush. So I thought that was a good way to do it. This is a story from the Washington Post, and I don't want to criticize the story, because actually, if you read the story, it contextualizes the study pretty well. But it does seem like, you know, the headline, you know, methane emissions from onshore natural gas drilling found lower than estimates. That's something that, because our public, as we saw in the opinion poll, doesn't maybe synthesize the news. Maybe they don't read to the end of some of these news stories that much. You see that headline, and you kind of seize on that. And so the study got really politicized, and different groups, you know, the environmental groups and kind of pro-drilling kind of anti-regulations group sort of took the study and kind of used it for their own political purposes in kind of a really interesting way. So Nina, and here's one example. This is a senator from Louisiana, I believe, put out this statement and kind of used it to say, you know, the part of the study that said that the EPA estimations from had been much higher than originally estimated. You know, put in this kind of political statement that said, you know, the EPA has been on a witch hunt to shut down hydraulic fracturing, and yet again, the evidence doesn't back up their excessive claims. and he goes on to say, shows that the EPA's emissions estimates from hydraulic fracturing are way off. But he didn't read the study. He didn't read all of the findings. He probably saw a headline or what have you. So it was kind of politicized. So Nina comes back and she writes this story. And I thought this was another really good example of kind of what we're trying to do at the Tribune especially, and sort of at organizations like us, where we're trying to take deep dives into explaining how issues work. So she wrote an article and actually talked to some of the researchers who worked on the study, who said, yeah, people kind of did with it what they wanted, but they kind of, they sort of missed a point. And I'm trying to scroll through her. Oh, sorry, I thought I had it up, but I'll just click on it again. Nope. Sorry about that. Oh. Yeah, that's right. I'll just go back to it. It's been a while since I've used PowerPoint, as you can see by my sort of non-artistic slides. Okay, there it loaded. So and I thought this was just a really good example of the context. And so, David Allen, the UT professor and lead author of the study, says, the focus of this work was just to collect measurements. Various stakeholders have emphasized some or all of these results. And so he puts it in his own words what the study finds later. What they found is relatively simple. Some emissions were lower than previously estimated. Some emissions were higher than previously estimated. And it's not a sexy quote that you really want to put in your article. It doesn't beckon readers to read to the end and everything. But it's important. If that's what the study found, that's important. So I kind of really like the way Nina handled that, and hopefully anyone who read the article kind of was able to get that out of it. So, so going on. So, and I have a couple, because I'm still relatively new at the Tribune. I've kind of put a couple of my old state line stories in here for other examples. So unfortunately, you can't always write these really deep backstories about a study. Like sometimes you have to report on the study and move on, or you have to, report on one issue of, within this broad topic of energy, and especially if you're thinking about Texas. Texas has pretty much any energy issue you can imagine, and especially since it's the biggest energy producing and consuming state, it's got this really diverse portfolio of, oil and gas. Obviously, it's the leader in the country. Of wind, it's the leader of the country. So there's so many stories, and sometimes it's overwhelming, and I'm still sort of in the process of, my head's still a little bit spinning as I'm trying to grasp on what stories am I going to write about today, and what am I missing. But so here's a Texas story I did before I got here, and I wanted to put it in here to sort of show, when folks, who might not kind of understand how the whole grid works, how all energy is kind of integrated on a grid, and how complex it is, how, natural gas policy, and natural gas prices affects wind production and sort of vice versa, just how sort of everything is together. I thought this study, so the study by the Brattle group that I reported on, it was kind of interesting. I decided to latch onto it just because it showed that natural gas and wind power, two very different sources of generation, and they often have advocates on very adversarial sides of the political aisle. But this is one possibility that can kind of work together on the grid. The idea that wind is an intermittent resource, and it often needs sort of backup generation from some of these natural gas plants, and so they can kind of work in tandem, to put it at overly simplify it, I guess. So I thought something that was kind of important to highlight to our readers as I'm trying to tell this broader energy story. And here's the story I did, and it's been a challenge to report on an issue that's been as politicized as fracking. If we're still allowed, I guess we've decided in the journalism world that we're now okay with saying fracking, even though it's kind of it's supposed to be the the environmental side, sort of dirty word for hydraulic fracturing. We've sort of moved to it's mainstream enough. It's a really tough issue to report on, and I wrote a story at the Tribune recently. It was just a pretty simple story about how cities actually have a lot of authority to kind of regulate the drilling industry's footprint, with zoning regulations and things like that. There's this big debate going on in Dallas right now over whether to really toughen their drilling ordinance, and it's sort of basically the argument that whether they adopt the proposed regulations right now, which would be a 1,500 setback between wells and houses and parks and so forth, that would sort of make or break whether the industry was going to drill in Dallas. But so it's been a challenge. For that story, I called up a representative from one of the companies who's wanted to drill in Dallas for a couple years now, and they've been really frustrated because they feel like Dallas has sort of changed the rules on them, and possibly after they've purchased a lease in Dallas. Anyway, but he sort of greeted me with a lot of skepticism. A lot of folks, kind of on both sides of the fracking issue, can be really skeptical of the media because sometimes we do our jobs, sometimes we don't, and sometimes we do our jobs and folks don't like what the outcome is and what the story is, what the findings are. So he greets me with, what's your slant on fracking? Are you pro-fracking or are you anti-fracking? And as a journalist who, I swear I try to be as objective as possible, I found that incredibly insulting, and I was sort of taken aback. It's like all of a sudden I'm on the defensive before I've met this guy. But I do understand because it's such a contentious issue. So I'm trying to sort of be careful in how I contextualize some of these issues. So anyway, this is a different story. This is a story I did at State Line. I went down to North Carolina, which is still having this debate. North Carolina is a state that has not had hydraulic fracturing. It doesn't have, it's kind of uncertain how much natural gas it might have in the shale deposits there. But the debate there has been really fierce. So I went down there as they're weighing whether to overturn a moratorium that's been in place for a year or so as they debate this. So I just wanted to put this in here as I'm talking about stories like this where obviously there's so much to the issue of hydraulic fracturing, and I sort of prefer not to write a fracking or no fracking story, but as a state like North Carolina in this case was debating this whole slew of regulations, I kind of had to take that all as one, and because that's kind of what the debate there had become. So I just kind of wanted to show you an example of, here's one way, without writing a book, I tried to, as I'm focusing, my key question in this article was about wastewater disposal. The issue in North Carolina was they don't really have very many good places to dispose of wastewater from the process, and the only potential place in North Carolina to inject some of these deep injection wells and inject the waste were in these aquifers, and kind of in these aquifers along the coast where a lot of tourism happens. So it was very, very controversial, and folks were worried along the coast, are we going to become a wasteland? Is that going to harm the tourism industry? So that was what I was down there reporting on. But at the same time, I realized, it's kind of hard. It's kind of a challenge. You don't want to write a story, even if it's just about one issue, that just people will kind of take and say, oh, fracking must be bad. You still have to somehow let folks know, even if you're not writing the whole story of rehashing all of the economic positives, the potential economic positives of sort of the shale revolution. You kind of have to let folks know that there is more to the story to kind of, direct them to other places. And so this isn't my most eloquent lead, but this is just one way that I did that in sort of letting them know that no, I'm not trying to. This article is not trying to make a judgment about this very complex issue, but it's acknowledging that there's more to it. So just my lead was, State Senator Bob Rucco wants to unlock North Carolina's oil and gas resources, and soon it's hard to ignore the daily buzz about shale-rich states flush with cash, putting the U.S. on track to become the world's largest producer by decade's end. And so I contextualized his legislation that he sponsored, and sort of his optimism that this is going to have a tremendous upside, sort of acknowledging that there is sort of more to this. And then I kind of get into this issue that I'm trying to explore very specifically, is this issue of where would they store their wastewater. So I'm just trying to, if that makes sense, I'm trying to let them know that there's more to it. Whether or not that hooked the reader, I don't know. I don't know what our web stats for that article were, but and I'll go back to my PowerPoint here. And here's another pretty similar example. And this is an article, too, where I kind of knew, too, when I was putting the headline on, that there were going to be some kind of, more libertarian groups who kind of just looked at the headline and left it at that, because there are these, even though issues, sort of backtracking, even though energy has become, in a lot of ways, a partisan issue. I think that's unfortunate because it's so complex. But you kind of tend to see some libertarian groups tend to say we should have no subsidies for renewable energy and things like that. And then you have some say solar advocates in Hawaii in this case who are just like, we need all subsidies. And a lot of times they kind of fall on either side of the aisle, Democrat or Republican. But anyway. Despite the headline, which, a libertarian could kind of rip that off and say, hey, solar subsidies are bad. I was talking about one specific state, how they did it. And I was telling this story, partly, it was definitely an energy story, but it was also kind of about how the state Hawaii and a lot of other states don't estimate the budget impacts of a lot of their decisions. It's sort of a wonky budget story that I tried to make interesting, but a lot of times, if they do, a lot of times states don't study budget impacts, so they'll just kind of willy-nilly, pass a tax policy and then kind of hope that it doesn't break the bank, or kind of hope that it goes well and incentivizes the industry like they hope. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. In this case, Hawaii was struggling. But again, I didn't want this story, anyone who read it to say, oh, tax credits for any energy source are automatically bad. This is about one specific situation. So I kind of similar technique as the North Carolina story. My lead is, solar is surging in Hawaii. There's no disputing that. So solar power installations have sprouted all across the islands, helping the state move towards its ambitious renewable energy goal and adding some 2,000 green-collar jobs to local economies. And it represents 15% of construction statewide. It's more than doubled its solar capacity from 2010 to 2011, and it's become a national leader. And talking to the solar advocates, the revolution we've been expecting. Hawaii, in particular, it's kind of an interesting case. They rely so heavily on imported oil, and it's so expensive, and so energy bills are through the roof. So solar, incentivizing solar is a huge issue for them because it's sort of over the long haul, it's low cost energy. No cost. The sun lights it up. It's just this sort of upfront cost. So it's a huge issue, and it is important to note, solar has boomed in Hawaii as a result of this credit. But at the same time, in Hawaii, it's carried a big upfront cost. And, this article wasn't even saying that cost is not worth it. It is or is not worth it. It was just kind of reporting that cost and showing how it had kind of screwed with their budget process a little bit. So at this time, residents had claimed some $42.8 million in credit, mostly for solar projects. And in the 6 months, that was in 2010. 6 months since then, it was 59. So this cost was ballooning, and it was making for some pretty harsh choices in the state government, and they're trying to figure out how are we going to police the credit. And as my article kind of got into the weeds in this issue, there were some folks who might have been claiming the credit who who shouldn't, and the rules were really murky and that kind of thing. So it was about 1 credit. I was kind of hoping people wouldn't look at it and say, this is something that we must generalize and make universal about all tax credits for solar or wind or what have you. So yeah, my takeaway there, my nut graph was Hawaii's experience illustrates the challenges states face as they look to shift away from fossil fuels and towards low carbon options. Though such policies may pay future dividends through reduced utility bills, improved public health, and minimize climate impacts, states are stuck with heavy short-term costs that shrink resources for other programs. Because it wasn't just Hawaii. Several other states who kind of had similar budget processes at different times. Oregon was one, Louisiana was one. Louisiana's credit cost, I think it was 50, or Oregon's cost 40 times as much as its projected price tag. So it's kind of interesting. And one of the state budget analysts said, "How do I know how many people are going to put solar panels on their roofs?" Like that was his quote, even though it's his job to estimate that before they make that policy. So that was just kind of one way to report on an issue without making this one article about one aspect of this issue sort of a definitive statement about solar power. This was a statement about how certain states ran this program and showed how questions had cropped up about what was the best way to do it, and so forth. So that was sort of one way I did that. I'm trying to think. And so basically, I'm trying to, with these stories, I'm hoping, people who are engaged, who are interested in this topic, will, read as many as they can and kind of piece together the energy story there. And I think looks like I'm kind of running time. So I think it's time for questions. If anyone has them, thanks for sort of letting me meander through a presentation on a very broad topic. I hope I touched on things that are interesting to you. And I guess one thing, right before questions, I did want to say, because some of you, may speak to the media now or may in the future because you're training to be an engineer or what have you, an expert on a topic, might speak to the media in the future. Sort of going back to sort of the methane story and everything, I would just say a lot of times reporters might be trying to force you to say things that are sort of juicy quotes and things like that, but I would hope, I think the good reporters would not want you to say anything that's inaccurate or sort of doesn't contextualize your research. So I would say stand strong when we're trying to force you to say something that fits well into our stories, because I and other good journalists, we want the best information that we can get, even if it's a little bit more boring than readers are looking for. So
just pick, they'll raise their hand.
Yeah, okay. Gotcha. Are there any questions? Yes?
You mentioned a number of times of trying to find that sexy title and trying to grab people's attentions, and I just wondered about the kind of push and pull of what you think is most important and what you think your readers will find most important, and how do you balance writing to what your readers want versus what you think they should want.
And that's a really good question too. When it's sort of and it's sort of beyond just energy reporting. So sort of all media, and we always have this sort of chicken and the egg debate. Does the media and does its headlines, does that influence public opinion, or is there some public opinion that kind of already exists and that's sort of forcing us to write these certain headlines? And I don't know. For me, I don't know if everyone in my field kind of has this luxury, but at the Texas Tribune, we are able to kind of do these deep dives and kind of be able to, I guess I don't want to say set the agenda, but we're able to maybe publish less what some folks call like sort of the Huffington Post clickbait than others. We obviously want readers and we want clicks and things like that, but I think our nonprofit model kind of allows us to really be authoritative and let our reporters who kind of know the issues dictate that. And then that's one great thing too about where I work is my editors, they're not energy experts, so they kind of rely on me to be able to talking to the right people and to do the best reporting I can and to have the right to take away the right thing from the study or from the expert that I'm talking to. So that it's really not that much of an issue, maybe at the Tribune as others, but otherwise it can be difficult though, and I guess I don't know sort of what the formula quite is, but it definitely can be an issue, maybe a little bit less for me than others, but yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. Anybody else? Oh, yeah.
Thank you for joining us. So will you be covering more of the capacity market discussion and maybe even tracking estimates on how much it may cost ERCOT to update their software to include capacity markets, and then really deep diving in some of Commissioner Anderson's data from the past that says we really haven't benefited or other places haven't benefited? I haven't really seen that level of detail in that, and I don't really expect it because that's more reading his stuff. But since this is such a big deal, do you think you'll dive into that? And then what are the other things that you're interested in right now as far as topics?
Good question, and thank you for that too. And unfortunately, yes, I am going to dive into that. It's one of these issues. I'm just kind of getting up to speed about what all the market issue is, because it's not something that was really on my radar when it was at State Line, but it's so integral to the Texas story. So actually, when I was reporting my first couple stories on it, I was kind of pulling my hair out, like, why does the biggest story in my beat have to be the most complicated? Because it really is. But I do plan to sort of dive into that. Right now, it's a really difficult issue because probably the thing that makes it most difficult is actually, I don't know if you probably know, ERCOT is overhauling the way it estimates our actual reserve margin right now. ERCOT puts out this data that looks really great, and it's the best data we have, and it's not a knock against ERCOT, but they're kind of realizing that a lot of times it kind of estimates, kind of overestimates how much demand we've had. If you kind of look back on past data, we may not have met the demand that ERCOT had forecasted and things like that. So that kind of makes it really difficult to sort of put dollar amounts on it. But I do plan on sort of diving into the estimates that have been made. Different groups have made different estimates about, there's kind of some of the opponents of the shift have said, it's going to add $2 to $4 billion to bills and to ratepayers' bills, and it's very possible that that could add more money. I'm sort of in theory, it sounds like it would. If you think about you're paying extra for this extra capacity, but then there's these other folks who say, well, it might decrease energy costs, on the really hot days and sort of the yeah, it is. How do
you gauge the value of insurance?
And that's the question, and that's the question that doesn't really have an objective answer. It's subjective. It's how much do we want, and sort of as everyone's explained the reserve margin issue, the sort of the cushion between the cushion between our capacity to generate power and actual demand on the hottest days. So everyone's explained to me the reserve margin issue. It's like no one has said here's why our target is 13.75%. It's almost a random number in a lot of ways. So it makes it difficult, and I don't know, you might have more insight on that too, but it makes it difficult to sort of estimate costs and to say definitively yes or no capacity market. But I do plan on sort of delving into it, and if there are other ways where I can kind of estimate certain costs, and I do kind of want to evaluate too the other capacity markets, PJM out east and in the Midwest, they have a capacity style market, but it is at the same time it's hard to compare states out east that are not as hot as Texas in the summer and things like that to Texas, which really is unique and has its own grid and everything like that. So I do plan on diving into that. Other issues, I'm really interested. I've been interested in sort of the impact of the big transmission build out, the CREZ, the competitive renewable energy zones that are finishing up just in a matter of weeks, and kind of what that has done for delivering wind power to the Texas grid. So I'm not sure. Maybe that story has mostly been told, but it's interesting to watch that. And also we're having this big, well, it's not very big now that we've the shutdown kind of obscured the wind tax credit debate, but the big thing that's been driving a lot of the booms and busts in the wind industry across the country has been the federal wind production tax credit. Sort of watching that and whether Congress is going to renew that now that it's sort of functioning, I guess-ish. That'll be kind of interesting to watch what's happened in Texas with this big buildup and what's happening at Congress, and whether how that will affect the industry, as it's kind of like tugging on different ends of it. So I want to do that, and then obviously there's all sorts of oil and gas stories. It's kind of exhausting. I want to get a lot of Railroad Commission data and kind of dive deep into it. Taking a look at how many inspectors they have per well. The Railroad Commission has traditionally been underfunded and continually cut its funding. Sometimes Railroad Commissioner heads actually advocated that. Now it's actually got a little bit more money, but it's still kind of struggling with a lot of backlogs in processing applications, and also just being able to visit well sites to inspect them. Some wells don't go inspected for years and years. So I kind of want to do a lot of data. What I didn't show you was sort of investigative stuff. I still haven't had a chance to do a lot of investigative stuff at the Tribune, but that's kind of working on several projects right now to kind of gauge our performance in some of those issues. But those are just a couple. But it's still like my head's spinning thinking about all the stories going on in Texas right now. So, yeah.
So study after study after study shows, or seems to show, in both water and energy, that the cheapest sources of those resources that we have are the ones we already have. In other words, conservation and efficiency tend to be the best return on dollar for investment for new capacity. Mm-hmm. Do you find that at ERCOT or in the larger discussion statewide that people are exploring efficiency and peak load shedding, load management, those kinds of issues? Because, engineers and planners, we like to build stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and great question, and that's actually been one thing. It's certainly a part of the market debate about whether we're going to switch to the capacity market, but it's maybe not as big of a part as it should be. Sort of the debate is, and actually, as I framed it to you too, it's all about new generation and meeting demand. But yeah, there is talk about things like demand response. Cycling off air conditioners at certain parts of the day instead of keeping them, continually running to kind of reduce, energy use at some of the hottest, peak times and stuff like that. But it seems like there is a huge way to grow in that. A lot of big cities are kind of taking the lead in efficiency. I've written a little bit about that. One kind of interesting, and again, it's one of those things where there's sort of like really positive stories kind of sprinkled throughout, but maybe as a state, as a whole, the state's maybe not really taking up that mantle. I don't want to make a definitive statement about the state, but a lot of people say, the state's maybe not addressing it sort of holistically with state policy, if that's able to be done. But one kind of positive on the efficiency side that's going on, I don't know if you're familiar with the Property Assessed Clean Energy program. So that's something that folks, legislation passed this last session to allow for municipalities to set up this program to finance energy efficiency projects that will, that can, cut pretty significantly cut energy use in this is just for this program would just be for industrial buildings, but Texas, of course, is such a huge industrial consumer. A lot of folks want it to apply to homes too, but that's sort of another story. But so there's this project that's being set up. There's a group, kind of a makeshift volunteer coalition that's now that the legislation has enabled it, they are sort of trying to get the word out to municipalities to set up this program in which states can, municipalities can finance, can allow these projects that basically allow allow banks and so forth to apply efficiency to basically loan out efficiency funds and on a building, and it can kind of act as a and it's been a while since I reported on this. You can basically take a lien out on your building, and you can kind of pay as you go. The idea, if the program function is that it will reduce upfront costs of these efficiency projects, and you'll just kind of chip away. You'll pay the bill. That shouldn't be any higher than your savings kind of per month. So there's kind of a lot of complex stuff wrapped up in it. I do have a story that was on that's in the Tribune in the New York Times. But you can check that out. So that's probably like one of the more exciting things going on. Also, cities are, some of the big cities, Houston, Austin, are sort of like setting sort of target goals for some of their utilities and things like that. But a lot of, I think there's a lot of room to grow on that, and a lot of people want that. And it's kind of interesting in this market debate, sort of where efficiency fits in. And I think some groups are trying to prepare for whichever scenario it ends up. If we stay energy only or capacity, they're trying to figure out ways to work in efficiency more in both markets. So if that helps. Yeah.
What are any sources or sites that you think are good that you like to read about energy issues, or what are some that you think are maybe particularly bad and don't ever present accurate information? If you know of one in either category or one or more.
Good question. Well, I tend
Besides
to...
Texas Tribune being a good
one.
one.
The Texas Tribune is, of course, the greatest. A really good site is now I'm blinking. It's climate... actually, probably one of the better sites. It's actually a paid subscription site, but it's really, really useful if you're an energy wonk. It's sort of a package. It's Energy Wire and Green Wire, if anyone's familiar with it. They have the company is called Energy and Environment, sort of the broad company, but they produce a bunch of different publications. There's Energy Wire, Green Wire, Climate Wire. I think that's it. But they're a really good go-to, and they kind of track issues kind of across the country. I tend to get a lot of my story ideas from reading the local news, and some is good reporting, some is not. I try to, I'll either read the good reporting, and I don't really know how to sort of define that, but reporting that doesn't really have a lot of holes. I'll try to sort of read that for my information, and then if I see a story that's maybe leaves a lot of holes or might have information that I don't really, think may be true or may be spun. I still try to use some of those sources to know what's going on the ground, because like a lot of the local news sources will say, hey, this thing is happening. The reporting might not be perfect, but at least I know it's happening, and then I can kind of take it from there. And so I'd say Energy Wire, Green Wire is the best. I don't know about just straight up bad sites. One, it's interesting to follow the hydraulic fracturing debate on ProPublica. I don't know if you've seen some of they've done some really, really good investigations, and there have been some that could have maybe had a little bit of counterbalance reporting, but a lot of them have brought up really interesting issues. They've done a lot of stuff on sort of abandoned oil wells, things like that. Their editorial side, it tends to be more negative against, say, drilling and things like that. The stories themselves are typically very sound, but they might be less likely to kind of report a more positive, like here's the economic benefit of hydraulic fracturing type story. But their reporting itself is sound. I'm trying to think of other ones, but I can't think of any straight up bad energy sites. I don't know if there's any sites that have that report only on energy that are bad. There's some aggregators that are kind of like pro-industry aggregators or so forth, or different ones that have different stances on things, but if that helps at all. Sorry.
We have time for a couple more questions.
In one of your slides, you showed some of the statistics that came out of the UT Energy poll, which basically, I think, showed that the general public either is pretty low in terms of their knowledge on energy issues, or they just underrepresent themselves on surveys, but either one sort of indicates probably that they're not confident about what they think they know about energy issues. So that said, do you guys have sort of a way you talk about balancing reporting the news and doing some of the investigative reporting you've been talking about versus also sort of trying to raise the bar in terms of general education on an issue that's pretty important in people's daily lives?
Yeah, I mean, I would say just sort of in general, seeing those results was pretty eye-opening, and it's kind of hard to say what is the cause of that. Is it sort of general apathy? Are people just not reading the news in general, or are they beginning to read our news and they just don't like our reporting and finding it interesting? I don't know. Sort of all I can sort of do is, sort of report in the best way I can. And so yeah, I mean, I look at those results and say, obviously, to me, it seems like folks might not be getting it. So kind of back to what I showed you with some of the explainers I've written, those were things that I decided I should maybe write. Actually, it was after I saw those results, because I realized it's really hard to kind of, especially with the whole market debate, which I keep bringing up, and apologies if folks aren't following it and it doesn't make sense right now. But with the market debate especially, I realized it's so hard to encapsulate what was going on there in a few sentences in a story about one step along the way. So I decided, yeah, because it seems like folks don't kind of get it, I want to just do the straight up explainer. It's not like, hey, breaking news, we're having this debate, or breaking news, here's what ERCOT does. But I thought it would be really helpful, hopefully to our readers, to have that really basic knowledge to draw on. And I'm kind of looking forward to doing further reporting after that, and I can link back to it too for readers who are kind of joining us later in the process, or from Google or something. If they're actually reading the story all the way through, then they can click on, maybe I'll hyperlink ERCOT, and they'll be able to click on it, and here's this video explaining kind of what they do and what that means and how important it is, if that helps.
So you said that there are benefits to working at Texas Tribune because of the nonprofit nature, and you have also written for Chicago Tribune, but then also for Washington Post and other news services. Could you share with us some insights about the editorial processes, especially the differences between for-profit and nonprofit, and also the interaction that goes on between the editors and the reporters on some of these more controversial and public issues?
That's a really good question, and actually, so my work has been published in those other for-profit, the Post and the Tribune, but it's actually been in the capacity where I've written it for State Line or for the Tribune, and then they've sort of republished it because we have partnerships with them and things like that. So my experience actually with for-profit news is relatively limited. I did briefly work for a local newspaper in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. I was mainly doing following along fire trucks and police officers and doing that fun stuff. But I do think sort of the nonprofit model in general, my experience in Iowa, helping start up the nonprofit there, Iowa Watch, and at State Line and at Tribune, it's kind of the sense I get from if I'm able to use my limited experience at the for-profit and kind of what I've heard and what I've studied in sort of my media studies, it definitely affords us, it gives us more time. I don't know if it's a nonprofit status explicitly, but sort of our mission is a lot different. Our mission is not necessarily to get clicks and make money, even though there are some wonderful for-profit newspapers and really dedicated journalists, and a lot of people, you don't go into journalism to make money, but newspapers have to make money, nonprofits have to raise money, but at the same time, we're able to kind of dive deeply. And one advantage too of I've been working for websites. We don't produce print publications. An advantage too is we don't have to produce like a multi-page print publication every day. I mean, we have sort of a target amount of stories we produce per day, but you're not forced to report a story that's not a story just to fill space, things like that. So that's kind of been one advantage I see, and then sort of as we expand too at the Tribune, because we somehow seem to have figured out how to raise revenue and sustain ourselves, it's been really nice. Our staff's gotten a lot bigger as opposed to, you see at a lot of the for-profits, you hear more and more about layoffs, and I've know a lot of people who have dealt with those problems at print publications. But our staff has gotten bigger, and the editors have told us this allows you to dive more deeply in some of your stories, and work hard obviously, but don't worry if you're not producing 3 or 4 stories a week. If you're going to get a really good one in the end, that takes a week or 2. So it's been really nice to kind of have that extra time. I mean, our newsroom is still kind of fast-paced, but it's maybe not as hectic as a print newspaper, where a lot of the reporters, because of budget cuts and things like that, have been forced to go out, write 3 stories a day, take pictures too. You've heard about, I don't know if you may have heard about the Chicago Sun-Times, for instance, laying off its entire photography staff and giving its reporters iPhones to take photos, because obviously that will yield good art for the newspaper. But we don't really have that pressure. We have more resources and that kind of thing. Iowa Watch was sort of a shoestring. We had a shoestring budget and things like that, so there were challenges in raising revenue and things like that while we were getting going. But at the same time, again, we didn't have to produce a paper, and so we were able to devote a lot of time to each investigation, kind of hope that each investigation would have a big impact, and as we distribute it to other news sources too. So.
We're out of time now, so we'll have to cut it off.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to chat afterwards too, I appreciate it. Yeah, thank you.